Today is September 22nd, 2025. I apologize for not keeping up with videos. There was a family emergency. A family member is in the hospital. It cannot be helped. I will do my best to keep up with my work. I am still posting daily on X and on Telegram. I am also posting on YouTube, just not videos. I'm just posting information. It's what I have time to do. I'm rushing to do this video. I will follow this video up with something more extensive. I will also cover very soon developments in Ukraine. That is a situation moving very rapidly today. I want to talk about the protests in the Philippines. This is another nation here in Asia, extremely important for China and the stability of the region. There are now protests identical to what had broken out in Nepal earlier this month and Indonesia even earlier this month. So 1 month, all of these people just all at the same time woke up suddenly and they said, goodness gracious, our country is corrupt. I'm going to go out into the streets. Oh my goodness, look at all these other people. They all decided to come out into the streets all at the same time for the exact same reason. And look, they're all flying One Piece flags. This is from Japanese anime, manga. It was a comic book. It's a TV series. They made movies out of it. I think there was like a Netflix live action series. Gen Z protesters are uniting behind a manga pirate flag. So we're supposed to believe that all of these movements on all opposite ends of Asia, all the way in the south in Indonesia, all the way to the east in the Philippines, all the way to the northwest in Nepal on the border of China and India, up in the Himalayas. We're supposed to believe that all of these kids just suddenly, all on their own, decided to adopt the same flag, same slogans, literally the exact same grievances, corruption. And we're upset because we're looking on social media and we see pictures of the luxurious life of these politicians and we're destitute. So we're all just gonna come out and burn our country down. Indonesia, Nepal, now the Philippines. We're all going to do it. And this is CNN telling you this fairy tale of how all of these kids are just spontaneously adopting this flag. And they mention Nepal, they mention Indonesia, and the Philippines. Where have we seen this before? We've seen this during the Arab Spring, the exact same narrative. Everyone all just suddenly woke up on the same day, at the same time, upset about corruption and the luxurious life of their political class. And they all decided to go out into the streets all on their own, spontaneously lead an uprising and overthrow their respective governments from North Africa all the way to the Middle East and back again, and everyone in between. We know for a fact that the protests during the Arab Spring were engineered by the United States. We know that because there was evidence that suggested this, that there were US State Department efforts to train and prepare these protesters years before the Arab Spring sprung. Then they admitted it in the New York Times. US groups helped nurture Arab uprising, and it's all the organizations that we're all so familiar with. And it says here, a number of groups and individuals directly involved in the revolts and reforms sweeping the region received training and financing from groups like the International Republican Institute, IRI, National Democratic Institute, and DI, and Freedom House. They talk about how these are based in Washington. They're tied to the National Endowment for Democracy, and it's all funded by the US government and the US State Department. And that is the case even to this day. And they say some Egyptian youth leaders, and actually many others, attended a 2008 technology meeting in New York where they were taught to use social networking and mobile technologies to promote democracy. And when they say promote democracy, they mean violently overthrow their country. Among those sponsoring the meeting were Facebook, Google, MTV, Columbia Law School, and the State Department. And this is the State Department's official website. This was from 2009, so this was an annual thing. It wasn't just 1 year. Alliance of Youth Movements. They got all of these agitators from the four corners of the globe and all of these interests: State Department, Facebook, Google, MySpace, Gen Next, MTV, PepsiCo. You know, people always downplay. Edelman is public relations. Marketing. These were all involved in shaping this years before it started. And then in April, after the damage was already done and it was irreversible, wars had already begun, like in Libya, Yemen, Syria, they said, yes, we did this. And they always eventually admit that they did it. And yet people never learn. They never learn. They never learn to spot the signs. They never learn to follow the money, follow the connections, follow the affiliations. What they do instead is they fall hard for these fake narratives spun by the very liars working with the State Department to prepare these events. The Western media was involved in planning the Arab Spring, and they're involved in helping plan these protests as well. And then when the protests begin to unfold, they deliberately lie to the public, trying to portray them as spontaneous and grassroots when they themselves were involved in it, and they know that that's not true. They did the same thing during the Arab Spring. If people who lived through it remember, the Western media, at the very beginning of the protest, tried to portray them as anti-US and anti-Israel, which got even more people involved in supporting them, when in reality, they were literally involved in training these agitators years before it happened. They knew full well that this was a US-engineered regime change operation, sweeping across an entire region, not just targeting one country, an entire region, the Arab world. They knew this, and they deliberately lied. This is what they do to create a pretext, a justification for US war all around the world. They repeatedly do this, knowing that they're lying to the public. And now they're lying again. So now we have seen 3 protests in 3 countries in Asia in 1 month: September, Indonesia, Nepal, the Philippines. I've already shown extensive evidence regarding each of these. I showed you in Indonesia, the organizations promoting the protests in Indonesia. Earlier this year, back in March, they were complaining about possibly being cut off from National Endowment for Democracy funding. And it said, without us, no scrutiny. Indonesia's independent media count cost of US funding cuts. If the US government is funding you, you are not independent media, okay? So that's the first clue. They talk about remote TV and Project Multatuli. These were both the media organizations promoting the unrest in Indonesia, and they are funded by the US government. And then after that was Nepal. And so we remember this article from the Kathmandu Post. This is local media in Nepal. FNJ, other groups object to government's decision to ban social media platforms. So we remember that the protesters there were complaining about corruption, the luxurious life of their politicians, but also a social media bill and then ban. And they're talking about the Federation of Nepali Journalists and all of these other organizations, and they list them. They list a number of them. I looked every single one of them up, and every single one of them is funded by the National Endowment for Democracy and also George Soros's Open Society. We have this from the Federation of Nepali Journalists, National Democratic Institute, the same organization, subsidiary of the National Endowment for Democracy that prepared all of those groups to overthrow their governments during the Arab Spring from 2011 onward. And we have Freedom Forum. You just come down here and they admit that they're being funded by the British Embassy and the British Foreign Office. Accountability Lab, also listed at Kathmandu Post, funded by who? Who funds them? The Department of State, right here. One after the other, after the other. That is who funds them. And we have our partners, Child Safe Net, you have Meta, you have all of these Soros, Open Society, US aid funded fake NGOs, funding them, backing them, working together with them. And then you have Hami Nepal here, who doesn't actually tell you who funds them, but they listed National Endowment for Democracy funded anti-China separatist organization, Students for a Free Tibet on their website, Gurkha Welfare Trust funded by the British government, the Foreign Office, and the British military specifically. And again, as I pointed out when I did my video about Nepal, Hami Nepal's website alone, that is suspicious, that should raise concern, but it alone is not enough evidence to suggest the US was behind the protests. But when you take Hami Nepal together with all of those organizations that spearheaded the opposition to the government's social media ban, then it is a smoking gun. That means literally every organization mentioned involved in the protests had some connection to the National Endowment for Democracy. I mean, Nepal won't say that they took NED money, but they themselves admit that they are connected to an NED-funded anti-China separatist organization that's actually based in the United States. It's not even based in Nepal or neighboring China. And so when you see 5, 6, 10 organizations involved in the protests, and every single one of them has a connection, direct or indirect, to the National Endowment for Democracy, it's a US-sponsored color revolution. So that's Indonesia, Nepal. What about the Philippines? So I checked out the Philippines. I looked into Western media. What are they saying about it? So they have this article: mass protests expected in Philippines capital amid public fury over alleged corruption in government projects. So again, literally the exact same complaint in Indonesia and Nepal. Just all of these people in the month of September 2025, they all just suddenly decided to complain about corruption as if it just started this month. Okay, so right here, civil society and church organizations are among the groups that have called for joint demonstrations. So they're telling you this wasn't spontaneous. There are organizations with funding, with political affiliations, leading the protests. Who are they and what are their affiliations? That's how you do analysis. You don't listen to their slogans and try to think why they're out there. You don't look at their flags and say, oh, they have a Palestinian flag. I support Palestine. I support the protest. No, you have to follow the money. You have to figure out who's funding them. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International pretend they care about Palestine. Are they good guys? No, we know they're funded by the US government, and the US government uses them to literally advance war propaganda, to justify wars and the worst abuses of human rights on earth this 21st century. So no, that is not how you do analysis. You don't do it by cherry picking claims and superficial symbolism. You have to follow the money. You have to see who's actually leading it. So who are these civil society organizations? If you look at local media, this is, it says Inquirer.net, but it's actually called the Philippine Daily Inquirer, but I guess they just call it Inquirer for short. Anyway, biggest flood of protests yet under Marcos. So they're going to tell you who is organizing these protests. So they have this, they're calling it the Trillion Peso March, and it was led by TindigPH. Also, all of these Catholic organizations, and anyone who knows anything about the history of the Philippines, first the Spanish came in with missionaries. Those were the NGOs of the time. Those were the ones that would infiltrate a society, undermine their indigenous institutions, and then install over them and basically erase them with Western-style institutions that controlled people in a way that suited Western interests, Spain's interests at that time, at the expense of their own local interests. And then the United States came in and they did the exact same thing. They had Christian organizations come in. They also had actual modern-day NGOs eventually come in. And the Philippines used to literally be a colony of the United States. They only got their independence in 1946, but ever since then, the US has still exercised tremendous control over the Philippines. Their military is stationed there. Their military is stationed there right now, and they've got their missiles pointed at China, and they're encouraging the Philippines to essentially become the Ukraine of Southeast Asia, triggering some sort of conflict with China directly. So anyway, we have TindigPH. So who are they? And this is how easy it was. You just type in TindigPH into Google and NED, and you will get this website right here. It's called INCITEgov. INCITEgov, very interesting name. And it says TindigPH, a coalition of democratic groups and advocates, convened a summit on November 18th and brought together diverse political figures and civil society actors, again, NED funded, open society funded, to delve into critical issues presently confronting Philippine democracy. So there fortifies the ranks of INCITEgov, and here they are. And when you see this costs money to do, so somebody's funding this. Who's funding INCITEgov? About INCITEgov. Let's just scroll down. Let's make it super easy for people that are pretending this isn't happening. Donor partners: International Republican Institute, National Endowment for Democracy, And here they are, Tindig, Filipinas, their logo down here, along with these other organizations, Asia, democracy. Whenever you hear the word democracy, should be a red flag should go up and say, do ordinary people actually care about this? Or is this something the US imposes on them and gets people wrapped up into to advance their own interests at the expense of these targeted nations? That should be a red flag. And then you go and you do your actual research. You follow the money and you find the NED logo, literally, side by side with Tindig Filipinas, who they admit are leading the protests. It's that simple. It's that simple. You could do it in literally 5 or 10 minutes. Sometimes it's a little more difficult. Sometimes the organization leading the protests isn't so obvious. But then you look at the media organizations supporting the protests in a favorable light, side by side with the Western media itself. You see the Guardian promoting this myth that these are about anti-corruption. This has nothing to do with the US creating unrest in the Philippines, Nepal, and Indonesia. These are all just people simultaneously deciding this is a problem in September 2025. Same goes for the CNN article. So you see NED-funded quote-unquote independent media, and CNN and Guardian and the BBC, they're all reporting the same thing. That's how you can spot it. And for a comparison, again, this is a protest that I lived through. I witnessed it. I was present at these protests in 2014 in Thailand. Thai people, Thai interests, Thai political parties, Thai independent media organized these protests against a US-backed client regime that they successfully removed from power. And this was what the entire Western media was said. This is the Washington Post, but there were many articles like this from the BBC, CNN. Thailand's anti-democracy protests should provoke a harsh rebuke from the US. And they were calling the protests a bunch of undemocratic rabble, ultra-royalists, extremists. They openly, obviously, overtly opposed those protests. When the Western media overwhelmingly is supporting a protest, it serves US interests. When they are openly opposing it and condemning it, it is probably a legit protest that the US is opposed to. And who in the Philippines is favorably promoting the protests that we know are being led by an NED-funded organization? It's Rappler. And here, they're talking all about all of these protests. And again, they're not raising any suspicion about it. They're just saying, wow, look at these great anti-corruption protests. What a great development for the Philippines. But Rappler was created by Maria Ressa. She literally is funded by the NED. She works for the NED. She got the extremely fake and meaningless Nobel Peace Prize. Okay, so it says Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa joins World Movement for Democracy at NED as chairperson. Okay, so she is NED. She runs Rappler. Rappler is promoting the protests. The organization coming out to lead the protests is literally funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. So that's 3 protests in 3 countries in just 1 month, all flying the same one-piece flag, all funded by the NED. The core organizations involved are funded by the NED or have an obvious admitted connection to the National Endowment for Democracy. This isn't a coincidence. This is a warning. The United States is trying to undermine and overthrow Asia. They're trying to do to Asia what they've just done to the Arab world and what they are doing to Eastern Europe and actually now spreading to Western Europe. And I warned people about this. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, end of May, remarks by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. This is run by a British corporate and arms industry funded think tank. He says the United States ignored this region. He's talking about the Asia-Pacific. He calls the Indo-Pacific. We became distracted by open-ended wars, regime change, and nation building. I had a front row seat as a soldier in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the U.S. is still meddling and interfering and killing people. These costly diversions lacked clearly defined goals and were not tied to the vital and core American interests. Yet President Donald Trump, whom U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth works for, is still involved in all of these places. President Trump just demanded Bagram Air Base back from Afghanistan. So He's saying we were distracted. This doesn't serve core, vital American interests, and yet the U.S. is still, under the Trump administration, involved in these places. The U.S. was just waging war against both Yemen and Iran in the Middle East, where Secretary Hegseth says the U.S. has become distracted. Anyway, that's besides the point. President Trump is changing that. We're not making the same mistakes. Not this generation and not now. We are done with that approach. We're focused on delivering for the American people, on safeguarding their security, on protecting their economic interests, and using common sense to preserve peace in the Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific. So what he's talking about is we were doing all of these horrible things in the Middle East. We're caught up in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe. But we need to focus on Asia. Do you think when the U.S. focuses on Asia, it'll be completely different than all the interference, meddling, regime change, war, proxy war the U.S. is doing everywhere else? Or do you think it'll be some sort of novel, new approach? No. He's talking about bringing to Asia what the U.S. is already doing everywhere else. And we are watching it now unfold. First in Indonesia, then Nepal, now the Philippines. I have warned for years and years, the United States, the National Endowment for Democracy, is building parallel institutions in all of these countries. The open stated objective is to surround China with an anti-China front. So they want to overthrow governments that are working together with China and install essentially Ukraine-style client regimes that will turn themselves into a battering ram, use themselves against China for Washington's interests at the expense of even their own existence, as Ukraine is doing right now. That is the plan. That is what we are watching. Now, some people, and this goes back to my post on X, some people might say, but Brian, I thought President Marcos Jr. was already completely compromised and serving U.S. interests. And people have to remember, there were elections, and when Marcos Jr. won those elections, who did he win those elections against? He was actually a moderate compared to this woman, Leni Robredo. She was actually even worse. She was literally involved in NED-funded programs in the Philippines. She was completely a U.S. puppet. Marcos Jr. obviously caved to the United States, but Leni Robredo was a U.S. proxy. She was already compromised. She was eagerly working for U.S. interests, and she wanted to be president of the Philippines. Marcos Jr. won instead. The U.S. coerced Marcos Jr., and he caved. And he has been serving U.S. interests. But apparently, obviously, he was told to do something he said no to. So now they're coercing him, possibly trying to overthrow him. Hard to tell at this point. We don't know what the purpose of this protest is. What we do know is the organization leading it is irrefutably funded by the US government, and it follows the identical pattern of US-funded protests in Nepal and in Indonesia. And we can see the reason why the US is interfering in every single one of these countries. They are of vital importance to the United States in its war, its confrontation, its campaign of encircling and containing China. Each and every one of these countries, absolutely instrumental. The same exact organizations are being funded and preparing here in Thailand, so just be ready for it. All of these countries in ASEAN should be looking at the unrest in the Philippines and preparing for it, not saying, well, that's a shame it's happening in the Philippines. I'm sure it's not going to happen here. If the NED is involved in your country, which it is in all of these countries, then yes, you are next. They will start, if you give them the opportunity, they will start similar protests in your country. So just be aware of it. And at the very end, I mentioned Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth in Singapore during the Shangri-La dialogue. He talked about the US pivoting from Europe and the Middle East back to Asia and bringing all of the meddling and interference and war with it. And so that is what's happening. I will cover this deeper in future videos. There's obviously many more organizations involved with NED funding. I could compile a list a mile long. Now, to people who say, Brian, anytime there's a protest, you just say the US is involved. But I just showed you the evidence. It's irrefutable evidence. I'm not just saying this, I'm proving it. And the fact is, the US is involved in most of these protests. People also accuse me of denying the agency of people in these countries to organize their own protests. I emphatically oppose that because I have documented protests organized by indigenous interests. I've done it here in Thailand. In 2014, The Thai people, interests in Thailand, not just people waking up on the same day at the same time, suddenly concerned about the same thing. No, interests in Thailand, political parties, the Thai military, whether they want to admit it or not. Independent Thai media made by Thai people in Thailand, supported by Thai interests. They all got together, pooled their resources, and organized massive protests against a US-backed client regime. And they successfully removed it from power. They did that, but it still required leadership and huge amounts of funding. And you could follow both, and you could see that it was indigenous, not foreign funded. Okay, so it is possible that there are indigenous protests, but they still require leadership and money, which leaves a very distinct footprint that you can follow and verify. So if you were wondering who is behind any one of these protests, that's what you have to do. Figure out who's leading it, which organizations are involved, who's funding them, and why. And if you can do all of that, then you can figure out every single protest. Don't be surprised if the United States is behind most of them, because the US has an entire organization dedicated to doing this all over the world. Around the world, not just in one or two places, the entire world. Okay, they have programs everywhere for every inhabited continent on planet Earth. Dozens, sometimes scores of programs in every single targeted country. Okay, so it is a reality. The US is a modern day global empire. They are involved everywhere around the globe. They have hundreds of military bases. They have even more resources invested in political interference. And they're doing it through organizations like the NED. You can follow and find the money yourself. Be aware, the US is trying to turn Asia upside down. President Trump, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, they all said, we're dumping Ukraine on Europe and we're pivoting to Asia. So we watched them dumping Ukraine on Europe, and now they're pivoting to Asia. And they have begun trying to start a process that turns Asia upside down. That is what we are watching. You have been warned. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It helps the channel grow. It's totally free to do. Look in the video description below for all the other places you can find and follow my work. I'm on X, Telegram, YouTube, Rumble. All of my videos get posted in all of these places. And again, if I'm not able to do videos for whatever reason, I am still posting news and analysis on all of these platforms. So follow me on these platforms. Look for these posts in between videos. I try to do 2 videos a week, but every once in a while, life creates circumstances that prevents you from doing so. At the moment, there's a family medical emergency. I have to go to the hospital every single day. There's no way around it. And by the time I get back, I don't have the time or the energy to do a video. I'm doing this in early morning. Anyway, thank you for your patience. In the video description will be all of the links that I just went over, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I don't monetize any of my social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. They're not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. And to everyone who has been helping out, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or if you have no resources to spare, there's no need to apologize. Just helping share my work with others, sending a kind comment, clicking the like or subscribe, all of that helps tremendously. All of that is what helps make this work possible. I thank you sincerely, and as always, thank you for watching.